Hey, it's Ken. We're going to continue our discussion about offensive handgun today. Before we get started, I would like to remind you of the video I did the other day. I titled "Be Careful Little Ears." It's a child song saying, "Be careful, little children, what your ears hear." And it's just a reminder that when you're on YouTube or on the internet, just because someone sounds like the expert, they may act like the expert, they may not be the expert. Okay? They may not be the expert. So you need to be careful. And what I'm going to talk about today about offensive handgun, take it with a grain of salt. And I'm telling you that because you may not like what I'm saying. And that's fine, but just hang in there. I'll get done as quickly as I can. As a review, we talked about, in the last video, we talked about GIGN, the French Anti-Terrorism Unit, about how they selected .357 mag being fired from a 5.5-inch barrel because they wanted to be able to produce a one-shot stop at 50 yards. So that leads us back to the discussion of handgun stopping power. Is there such a thing? Well, compared to rifles, the answer is no. However, that does not mean that there is no such thing as handgun stopping power. The French determined that there is such a thing as handgun stopping power, and that's why they chose the .357 Magnum being fired from a 5.5-inch barrel. That's also why the special warfare community produced the Mark 23, because they were looking for stopping power from a .45 caliber pistol. And just because people on the internet these days say that there is no such thing as stopping power from a pistol, that doesn't mean it's true. All right, that doesn't mean it's true. You can go and look at the last video and where I discussed several things, myths that are on the various YouTube channels, things that people say that later turn out to be, we find out are untrue. So just because something was true 20 years ago or 40 years ago, then someone now says, oh, that's not true. That doesn't mean what they're saying is correct. It could very well be true. And in this case, it is true. So we're going to be talking about offensive handgun. And here in this discussion, I don't care what, I'm not going to try to tell you what pistol to purchase. That doesn't matter to me. Glock, H&K, SIG, whatever, right? Don't care. What is the most important discussion, in my opinion, about offensive handgun is barrel length. And what I have done is I have gone through various channels and sources on the internet to determine the muzzle velocity at 50 yards for a specific projectile and specific barrel lengths. Now, the projectile or the cartridge that I selected, or the brand that I selected, was Speer Gold Dot. That's pretty ubiquitous throughout the gun community. Everybody seems to agree that Gold Dot is, if not the standard, it is pretty close to being the standard. It is one of the standards. So what I did was I went on the internet and YouTube and found various channels shooting the Speer Gold Dot, various calibers and various barrel lengths. And in hope of showing you why I say that if you're going to use your pistol as an offensive handgun, you need to at least have, or you need to have a 4.5-inch barrel minimum. Shouldn't go any shorter than that. And then after that, I made a table. Now, I'm not a big YouTube editor, big time channel guy. So what I did was I just typed it all out. And here it is. Okay. And I'm going to go through it as I'm holding it up here. And then I'll see if I can't figure out how to make it or post it in the description. So the first cartridge that I selected, of course, is Gold Dot 9mm plus P 124 grain. Right under there, it states 50% expansion failure rate at 1,025 feet per second. Now, what does that mean? That means for every 4 shots you take with this cartridge, if it is going 1,025 feet per second or less, there's a 50% failure rate on expansion. Now, there's no telling when the failure is going to happen. You could shoot 2 cartridges and both expand fine. The next time you shoot 2 projectiles, you could have one fail to expand. And the next time you shoot 2 projectiles, both of those projectiles could fail to expand. So to achieve 100% expansion, the projectile needs to be traveling faster than 1,025 feet per second. Right under that, we have barrel length, and you can see that I have a 4-inch barrel length and a 5-inch barrel length. The factory MV that is printed on the box containing the cartridges. The actual MV that was taken by a chronograph. Factory MV at 50 yards, which is also comes from the box. And then expressed MV at 50 yards. Now, why does it say expressed? Well, there's really nobody testing what the MV is of these cartridges at 50 yards. So I used a mathematical formula to determine that if the projectile lost X amount of feet per second at 10 yards, then at 50 yards, if it lost speed at the same rate at 50 yards, then that's how we determined what the expressed muzzle velocity at 50 yards would be. Now, is that completely accurate? No. No, it's not completely accurate, but it doesn't need to be completely accurate because I'm just trying to give you something here to look at so you can see and understand what I'm talking about. So let's look at this 9mm plus P 124 grains. From the 4-inch barrel, the factory muzzle velocity for this cartridge is 1,220 feet per second. From a 4-inch barrel, the actual muzzle velocity is 1,160. So that's okay if you're 10 feet or 10 yards rather. That's okay. The projectile is going to function. At 50 yards, you can see the muzzle velocity is 1,085 feet. But based on what we shot at 10 yards, at 50 yards, we expect the projectile to be traveling at 1,031 feet per second. And there you can see the problem. So if you have a 50% expansion rate failure at 1,025 feet per second, then firing a plus P 9mm projectile, Gold Dot, and you're trying to make a 50-yard shot, then from a 4-inch barrel, the muzzle velocity is going to be somewhere around 1,031, which is not encouraging. So you probably could hit a target at 50 yards away. But if you'll recall that in our discussion on the last video, the GIGN discovered that stopping power for a pistol is a result of both penetration and expansion. So at 50 yards, you may have a solid hit on the target and you may get some expansion, but you may get good penetration, but the chances of you getting good expansion is very small. However, the next line down, if we change the barrel to 5 inches, the actual MV is 1,205. And the expressed MV at 50 yards would be 1,072. So now we know that using a 5-inch barrel at shooting at a target at 50 yards, we are going to achieve both the expansion and penetration we needed to have stopping power. And that's the way this chart works. Okay? So let's move down to the next one, which is the Gold Dot 357 SIG 125 grain. Now, I couldn't find any videos that showed the 357 SIG not filling, because there were no videos of someone shooting the 357 SIG from a 3-inch barrel. So, but we do know that the same type of projectile has a 50% expansion failure rate at 1,250 feet per second. Okay, so being fired from a 4-inch barrel, we know that the factory muzzle velocity is 1,350 feet per second. The actual muzzle velocity is 1,268 feet per second. The factory MV for 50 yards from the box is 1,184 feet per second. And the expressed or calculated MV at 50 yards is 1,112 feet per second. So we know that shooting 357 SIG from a 4-inch barrel, you should achieve good penetration and good expansion for the 357 SIG 125 grain Gold Dot cartridge. However, I'm somewhat skeptical that most people can make this shot, a 50-yard shot, a good 50-yard shot, hitting in the A or the B zone, or C zone, whichever one it is. Or how about keeping all your shots inside the 8 ring? How's that? Keeping all your shots inside the 8 ring of an FBI target. I'm kind of skeptical that the majority of people have that skill. Okay. However, with a 4.5-inch barrel and with the longer sight radius, for the majority of people who train with their pistol consistently, the chances of hitting an FBI target or keeping all of your bullets inside the 8 ring on a standard pistol target goes up exponentially because they have a longer sight range. And as you can see, using a 4.5-inch barrel, the actual MV at 10 yards is 1,375 feet per second. And the expressed or calculated MV at 50 yards is 1,206 feet per second. Now, and this is why the 357 SIG fired from a 4.5-inch barrel is my choice for the offensive handgun. All right? We definitely have enough muzzle velocity coming from a 4.5-inch barrel to produce good penetration and good expansion. So let's move on to the next. At the top here, we're talking about the 357 Magnum 125 grain projectile. And if you'll see the note right under there, it says 100% expansion failure at 950 feet per second. That means at this muzzle velocity, 950 feet per second, there is zero expansion on any of the projectiles. However, if you look at the 4-inch barrel data, the factory muzzle velocity is 1,450 feet per second. The actual muzzle velocity is 1,427 feet per second. And the factory MV at 50 yards is 1,260 feet per second. And the expressed or calculated muzzle velocity at 50 yards is 1,240 feet per second from a 4-inch barrel. And that kind of explains why the GIGN selected at that time, back in the 70s, 1970s, they selected the 357 Magnum being fired, 125 grain projectile, being fired from a 5.5-inch barrel. Because at 50 yards, you know that you're going to get expansion, and you know you're going to get good penetration, and that means you're going to get good stopping power. All right, and our final one is the Gold Dot 40 Smith & Wesson 165 grain projectile. And for this cartridge, we have 100% expansion failure at 1,000 feet per second. This projectile, or this cartridge being fired from a 4-inch barrel, the factory muzzle velocity is 1,150 feet per second. The actual muzzle velocity is 1,173 feet per second. The factory muzzle velocity at 50 yards is 1,042 feet per second. And the expressed or calculated muzzle velocity at 50 yards is 1,063 feet per second. So, and there's the issue. There's no guarantee firing at 50 yards, at a target 50 yards away, that the 165 grain cartridge or projectile is going to achieve good penetration and expansion. No guarantee. All right. However, fired from a 5-inch barrel, the actual muzzle velocity is 1,232 feet per second. The factory MV, again, is 1,042 feet per second. However, the expressed or calculated MV at 50 yards is 1,116 feet per second, which is well enough above the expansion failure muzzle velocity to achieve good penetration and good expansion. So, this is not intended as a caliber war video. However, I have stated several times, multiple times, that as the FBI says, the 9mm is an adequate cartridge, especially a plus P, 124 plus P. It is an adequate cartridge. It is an adequate self-defense round. However, there are other projectiles, other cartridges, other combinations that are better. And if you're going to use your pistol as an offensive handgun, not just defense, but defense and offense, then 9mm is still adequate. It's still adequate, but it is not good. It is not the best choice. However, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to say that if you're going to carry a pistol on your kit, then you should be carrying a pistol that has a 4.5-inch barrel minimum. Because if you have to take a 50-yard shot, then you want to ensure that you're achieving stopping power with your cartridge. And once again, just because someone says on the internet that pistols don't have stopping power does not mean that what was discovered in the 1970s by the GIGN is no longer true. Of course it's true. Stopping power for a pistol is a combination of penetration and expansion of the projectile. And I would like to say one more thing. When I was a young Marine, I had a sergeant major who did at least a couple of tours in Vietnam. And one day we were doing bayonet training, and he said something that has stuck with me these past, 35, 40 years, that being in a knife fight and a pistol fight is pretty much the same thing. If you're going to win, you need multiple large organ wounds. Multiple large organ wounds to put your target into shock. The faster your target goes into shock, the quicker you win. And that's that's what we need with a pistol caliber. We need penetration and expansion to cause the largest wound possible so that the target goes into shock quickly. So once again, this is not about the caliber war. I really don't care what pistol you carry. Hopefully, if you want to choose 9mm, go right ahead. It's adequate. It will do the job. However, there are better choices. And hopefully I've proven that to you today. So for offensive handgun, you need to have a handgun that has a minimum barrel of 4.5 inches. And keep in mind, from my previous video, just because I said all this stuff doesn't mean you should suck it in as the gospel right off the bat. You need to do your own research. Now, I've done the research for you. I've got no skin in this game other than to help try to guide you on what you should do. Because there's no point in putting a self-defense pistol on your kit. No point at all. No point at all. Just don't do it. Carry extra AR magazines or whatever, AK or more shotgun shells or whatever the heck it is you're carrying. If you're going to, put a self-defense pistol, what are you training for? You're training to be on CAG? You think you're going to be busting down doors, doing room clearing if shit goes sideways? I doubt it. Okay? I doubt it. And there's one more thing I'd like to talk about here, and it's going kind of long, so I'm going to try to hurry up. While the GIGN was doing their research on offensive pistols, there was one more interesting thing that they found. They found that there are times when the target is within 50 yards of the shooter. The pistol is the best option. The pistol is the best option. There are those times. They do happen. But if you have a self-defense pistol in your kit, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in trouble. So if you're going to carry a pistol on your kit, make sure it's a full-size service pistol. I hope you have a blessed day.